Hello and good day to all of our participants and attendees from across the world. My name is Catherine O'Rourke. I'm one of the co-organizers of this workshop along with Meghan Campbell and Loveday Hodson. And I also direct the Transitional Justice Institute at Ulster University, which is hosting the workshop. It falls to me to welcome you all very warmly and to thank you so much for joining in our discussions, particularly to our distinguished panelists and participants. In these introductory remarks, I'm going to speak briefly to our motivations and our objectives for convening the workshop before handing over to Meghan and Loveday for their introductory remarks. So the workshop brings together key voices and stakeholders from around the world to consider how the leading instrument on women's equality, the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Cedaw, can best respect, protect, and fulfill the rights of lesbian, bisexual, and transgender women. In addition to the Cedaw committee and the independent expert on SOGI, we have participants from civil society from across Africa, Asia, the Americas, and Europe, all committed toward understanding better how international human rights law, particularly Cedaw, can be directed towards fuller equality. In putting together this workshop, we had a number of mutually reinforcing objectives. First, we wish to provide a space and a forum for a focused discussion on the question of Cedaw and sexual orientation and gender identity, an opportunity to bring together conversations that had otherwise been happening in quite dispersed spaces. Further, the contributions from our civil society colleagues will focus quite directly on what it means in practice to have rights under Cedaw violated due to one's sexual orientation and gender identity. Also more positively, to see what might be done to enhance Cedaw compliance in this area. We therefore hope that the workshop will contribute to an evidence-based to lead to a better informed discussion on Cedaw and SOGI. And to that end, in order to memorialize our discussions in this workshop and to make a contribution to this evidence base, we will be producing a written report from our discussions over the next 2 days. And we hope to turn that around quite soon and to share that with everybody here, with the Cedaw committee, and indeed more widely with the human rights system. In saying that, we are of course mindful that there are many themes that aren't addressed or will inevitably be under-addressed in this workshop: rural women, girls, women with disabilities, several others. So we therefore view this workshop as the start of a conversation that all of us will continue individually and through different combinations of participants to bring in other voices and themes. Linked to that, we see the workshop as an invaluable opportunity for providing the basis for informal and formal networks amongst civil society, academics, and actors in the human rights system to continue to advance this area over the coming years. Ultimately, connected to all of these things, we hope that the workshop may ultimately provide some sort of tentative basis to a general recommendation on this theme from the Cedaw committee. Recognizing that this is a longer-term goal, in the interim, we see real potential for a model general recommendation drafted by civil society, likewise to inform the work of the committee and the human rights system more broadly. So I'll turn now to Meghan.
Thank you. Just to echo Catherine, thank you everyone for participating, for attending, for zooming in, particularly for people who are either really early in the morning or really late at night. We just appreciate everybody's generosity in giving their time to what we think is a really important project and endeavor. So at first glance, it might seem odd to think about Cedaw and sexual orientation and gender identity, because on a plain reading of the text of Cedaw, it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence that it's really well placed to address the discrimination and inequalities experienced by lesbian, bisexual, trans, queer, or gender nonconforming women. The text makes no real reference to women's sexuality. There's a few off references to family planning, but nothing really much beyond that. Nor does it really talk much about the diversity of women's sexuality or sexual experiences. And it would be probably fair to argue there's an implicit understanding of women as being cis women within Cedaw. And there have been lots of critiques over the years that the vision of a woman in Cedaw is really a white, middle-class, sort of global North woman. And of course, over the 40 years since Cedaw came into force, there's been a lot of work done to deconstruct that kind of maybe implicit vision of what it means to be a woman within Cedaw. in part that the text reflects this understanding of women because it was drafted at a certain period of time and reflected the concerns of the drafters about what was the pressing issues of gender equality in the 1960s and 1970s. But the great thing about all kind of human rights treaties, and particularly Cedaw, is that they are meant to endure over a long period of time, and they're written in a way as to be evolutionary and to be dynamic and to be responsive and to new concerns about gender equality, and to be able to be reinterpreted for each generation and re-understood as to be able to address how does discrimination and inequality impact on women's equal enjoyment of their fundamental freedoms and human rights, as it says in Article 1. And the workshop today is really a response to that kind of built-in evolutionary mechanisms or tones to Cedaw. And the workshop today looks to take that step forward and think about how can Cedaw respond to discrimination against women in the context of sexual orientation and gender identity. And it's here that the work of the Cedaw Committee in adopting an intersectional approach to interpreting Cedaw becomes so key and kind of points the way forward into the beginnings of thinking more coherently and comprehensively about sexual orientation and gender identity in Cedaw. In General Recommendation number 28, the Cedaw Committee held that women inherently and inextricably experience intersectional discrimination. And this is such an exciting way to think about intersectional discrimination that women experience. So the committee was saying, rather than looking at one ground in women in isolation of every other identity characteristic, it adopts what I've called a very fluid and expansive approach that really seeks to place women in context and understand how being a woman interacts with a wide range of not only identity characteristics that we recognize commonly in discrimination law, like race or age or disability, but also identity characteristics that are not commonly recognized in discrimination law, like poverty or illiteracy or prisoner status, and against cross-cutting experiences like climate change or conflict or post-conflict environments. So it really uses the concept of woman as a pivot point to understand a wide range of identities, experiences, and cross-cutting events that shape how women experience the world and how they experience discrimination inequalities. The Cedaw Committee has really pioneered this exciting mandate, and it's uniquely positioned to consider how sex, gender, identity, and sexual orientation are linked, interact, and contribute to disadvantaged treatment. On the kind of more positive side of the coin, it's also imperative to understand how sex, gender, identity, and sexual orientation to interact and how it can be that interaction can be a springboard for rethinking and challenging long accepted essentialist categories and point the way forward for a more transformative approach to the realization of women's equality and human rights. And perhaps the greatest insight from the Cedaw Committee that can be taken forward in today's workshop is that this fluid and expansive approach to intersectionality is that lesbian, bisexual, trans, intersex, queer, gender nonconforming women are not a monolithic category in and of themselves, but there are convergences and divergences within sexual orientation, gender identity that need to be acknowledged, understood, taken into account, and in some cases celebrated. It's just really important that in respecting and protecting and fulfilling the equal rights of women in the context of sexual orientation and gender identity, it's crucial to think about how the commitment to equality in Cedaw can respond to and take account of the intersectionality within sexual orientation, gender identity. And with that, I'll now turn it over to Loveday, who will talk a little bit more about some of the key themes that we're going to be looking at over the course of the next 2 days.
Thank you, Meghan. I think Meghan's identification of the transformative approach to equality that the committee has adopted is really key to our excitement and commitment about what's on offer when we look at SOGI rights through the lens of the convention. So the Women's Committee's focus on gender and women's experiences means its contribution to the fast-moving global discussions on SOGI rights and its contribution to addressing in particular the marginalisation of lesbian, trans, gender variant and queer women is vitally important to the discussions that are taking place. The voices and experiences of women have at times, in fact frequently, have been left behind in discussions on SOGI rights. Cedaw, in its inevitable foregrounding of women, is uniquely positioned then to redress this balance and to shine a light on international human rights law's blind spots in this respect. And indeed, the committee has made a number of important interventions on SOGI rights and has perhaps made a more frequent contribution in this sphere than other UN human rights treaty bodies. But this opportunity, however, comes with challenges. And with the recognition of SOGI rights comes a need to address difficult questions head on. And we're really grateful that you've all agreed to take on this challenge and pressing task and joined us today in thinking about these questions. Not least as an imperative to respond to the apparent textual limitations of Cedaw that Meghan so coherently outlined. The committee has taken a number of important steps to recognise the intersectional nature of discrimination that women experience, and in turn, the gendered subject of the treaty. Over the course of this workshop, over the next 2 afternoons here, we will consider how this analytical approach might be further concretised and applied in the committee's practice. This is no easy task, and there are no easy answers. While acknowledging gender diversity in broad terms orientates the committee's direction in important ways, there is considerable work to be done in understanding diverse women's experiences of discrimination and rights violations and the concrete obligations on state parties that flow from these. In what particular ways does Cedaw's general recognition of the discrimination that trans and gender variant women and girls face, for instance, translate into concrete obligations? In what ways can and should Article 5's call for states to take all appropriate measures to modify social and cultural patterns based on patriarchy and gender-based stereotypes be harnessed to further protect SOGI rights? Medicalisation and pathologisation are issues that are ripe for discussion here. Cedaw has made a number of interventions with respect to criminalisation of same-sex relationships. But what obligations does Cedaw place on states to protect relationships of care when they fall outside of state parties' legal frameworks? What does it mean, for instance, to recognise the relationship rights of women in same-sex relationships, particularly when the global picture of formal relationship recognition is such a patchwork? In what ways can and might Cedaw's impressive analysis of gender-based violence against women extend to lesbian and trans women, for instance, and on migrant women seeking refuge from gender-based violence in particular? When we think about these questions, what are our shared priorities and aims? How do we answer these questions without creating further exclusions and marginalizations? As I said, there are a lot of questions for us to think about over the course of these workshops. Maintaining the intersectional approach and avoiding the lure of the analytically compelling that is, in her deceptive simplicity, universal woman is an ongoing challenge. The question that inspires us today is that of how we can ensure that the impressive gains for women's rights that have been made under the Convention are gains for all women, and that no woman or girl is left behind. So I'm really looking forward to these discussions. We're delighted that you're here, and I'm going to pass back to Catherine now so we can start the real conversation.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Meghan and Loveday, for those compelling comments. So just before I proceed to our next speaker, a technical note. For those of you who are attending, who are watching the live stream, just to note that you have, you can feel free to include your written comments or questions as things proceed, and we'll attempt to address those in the Q&A session. So moving on then, it's my great pleasure and delight to welcome our keynote speaker from the Cedaw committee, Dr. Leah Nadaria. Leah very generously got back very quickly when we asked her to make this contribution, and we're so grateful to have her. Leah is from Georgia. She's a member of the Cedaw committee since 2015. In that time, she's been a member of different working groups and task forces of the committee, including the working group on communications, the working group on inquiries, and the task force on women in conflict prevention, conflict and post-conflict situations. Leah, I will hand over to you now, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much. I want to convey my warm greetings to the workshop participants and thank organizers, Euro Asia Pacific and UK universities for enabling discussion on Cedaw and SOGI framework. I'll try to share screen of my presentation. If it works. I'm not sure. Okay, I'll continue without presentation. I'm so glad that Cedaw committees practice in recognizing how gender-based discrimination against women intersects with and is determined by other assets of identity and the circumstances of disadvantage has positive evaluation, and that committee as a human rights treaty body is identified as making the most frequent references to sexual orientation and gender identity. Cedaw committee as a treaty body has a broad human rights mandate relating to all forms of discrimination against women without any distinction. Through the language of equality embodied in the convention is based on comparison between women and men, the committee has repeatedly insisted that the obligations contained in the convention express broader dimensions of inequality, including inequalities among women themselves. The committee has emphasized the intersectionality of all forms of discrimination, and in pursuant of definition of equality had addressed the disproportionate burdens borne by rural women, women with disabilities, women with HIV/AIDS, and LBTI women, among others. Cedaw jurisprudence advanced in the past, and I'm sure will advance in the future, the doctrine that each person's self-defined gender identity is integral to their personality and is one of the most fundamental aspects of self-determination, dignity, and freedom. From early 90s, we can trace the evaluation of the language on human rights violations against lesbian, bi, trans, and intersex women, and its connection to right to sexual orientation and gender identity, with other substantive rights guaranteed under Cedaw. Under different articles and issues, Cedaw concluding observations include reference to sexual orientation and gender identity, and are guiding member states, as stated in Article 2F Cedaw Convention, to condemn discrimination against women in all its forms, agree to pursue by all appropriate means and without delay a policy of eliminating discrimination against women, and to undertake all appropriate measures, including legislation, to modify or abolish existing laws, regulations, customs, practices, which continue discrimination against women. Here are concluding observations that include a reference to sexual orientation and gender identity, in the underlying positive aspects or concerns and the recommendations in tackling discrimination. For example, discrimination. Concluding observation, New Zealand, April 12, 1994, para 612. The government has passed a new Human Rights Act in 93, extending the ground of prohibited discrimination. Its grounds would now cover gender issues, including sexual orientation. Discrimination and assignment. Concluding observation, Sweden, April 2008, para 10. Committee welcomes the amendment of Swedish Alliance Act in 2006, which provide for the granting of refugee status to persons claiming fear of persecution on the grounds of gender and sexual orientation, and which will be of benefit to women refugees. Discrimination stereotypes. Concluding observations, Panama, 2010. The committee is gravely concerned that certain groups of women, in adding to being affected by gender stereotypes, face multiple forms of discrimination and violence on the grounds such as sexual orientation and gender identity. The committee also urges state parties to transform its recognition of the problem of multiple forms of discrimination into an overall strategy for eliminating gender stereotypes related to women in general, and in particular to discrimination against women as specified in paragraph 22. Discrimination and violence. Concluding observations, Albania, 2010, para 1943. Committee recommends state party monitor the impact of gender inequality and anti-discrimination legislation, anti-discrimination legislation, identify inconsistencies and address them as appropriate, with a view to ensuring that the implementation of legislation is conducive to effective elimination of discrimination against women, especially women belonging to disadvantaged groups, such as women discriminated on grounds of their sexual orientation and gender identity. State party monitor the impact of gender inequality. The committee calls on state parties to implement fully the law on protection from discrimination in relation to discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation by providing effective protection against discrimination and violence against women on such grounds. Criminalization of consensual same-sex relationship. Concluding observation, Uganda, October 2010. Committee calls on state parties to decriminalize homosexual behavior and provide effective protection from violence, discrimination against women based on sexual orientation and gender identity, in particular through enactment of comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation covering inter alia the prohibition of multiple forms of discrimination against women on all grounds, including grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity. To this end, committee urges state parties to oppose the private members' proposal anti-homosexuality bill. And starting from 2010, Cedaw began to regularly include sexual orientation and gender identity, its general recommendations, particularly in comments on intersectionality and multiple forms of discrimination. First was general recommendation number 27 on older women and protection of their human rights. The discrimination expressed by older women is often multidimensional, with the age factor compounding other forms of discrimination based on gender, ethnic origin, disability, poverty levels, sexual orientation, and gender identity, migrant status, marital family status, literacy, and other grounds. Older women who are members of minority, ethnic, indigenous group, internally displaced or stateless, often experience a disproportionate degree of discrimination. General recommendation number 28 on the core obligations of state parties under Article 2 of the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination. Para 18. Intersectionality is a basic concept for understanding the scope of general obligation of state parties contained in Article 2. Discrimination of women based on sex and gender inextricably linked with other factors that affect women, such as race, ethnicity, religion or belief, health status, age, class, caste, sexual orientation, and gender identity. State parties must legally recognize such intersecting forms of discrimination and the compounded negative impact of women concerned and prohibit them. They also need to pursue policies and programs designed to eliminate such occurrences, including, where appropriate, temporary special measures in accordance with Article 4, Paragraph 1 of the Convention and General Recommendation number 25. General Recommendation 33 on women's access to justice of 2015, and Para 1 and 8 also cover LBTI rights. Right to access to justice is multidimensional. It encompasses justicability, availability, accessibility, good quality, accountability of justice system, and provision of remedies for victims. And noted that being lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or intersex are among intersecting factors that make it difficult to gain access to justice. And finally, General Recommendation 36 on right of girls and women on education, Para 45-46, state that bullying, harassment, threats against such students, follow students and teachers constitute barriers to their right to education. Limited education and cultural taboos are among the factors that prevent lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex students from achieving social mobility, increase their vulnerability to violence. And committee recommends state parties address discrimination against lesbian, bisexual, and transgender women and girls and intersex persons by ensuring that policies are in place to address the obstacles that impede their access to education. But the analysis of Cedaw committee's concluding observations show lacking of consistent approach in use of terminology, referring to LBTI women, sometimes LBTI women, LBT women and intersex person, LBTI persons, as well as use of SOGI recommendations. Standalone references are made to lesbian women, lesbian and bisexual women, to same-sex union, civil union, cohabitation, partnership. Some recommendations refer explicitly to transgender women and intersex persons. In past and present, language, sexual orientation, and gender identity is the subject of the committee's long discussion. I want to note that general recommendations 27 and 28 were not adopted by consensus, but by vote. The committee was negatively affected by controversiality, and discussions rose from the SOGI concept in international human rights system and social constructionist definition of gender that has been seriously contested and challenged in international human rights fora. Gender backlash encompasses activities pursued by various local initiatives which introduce discriminatory laws restricting freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly, including so-called anti-propaganda laws, and firmly promote traditional over equality. I want to note that still 69 countries have laws that criminalize private consensual sexual relationships between persons of the same sex. Such laws typically prohibit either specific type of sexual activity or an intimacy on sexual activity between persons of the same sex. However, they are also frequently used to penalize trans people regardless of their sexual orientation. Brunei, Islamic Republic of Iran, Mauritania, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, and Yemen, plus regions of Nigeria and Somalia are applying death penalty for consensual same-sex relation. Nevertheless, the committee constantly makes decisions about controversial issues when advancing women's human rights, but never regressing, and embodies continuous evolution. Each generation of experts bring forward their own experience, strategies, and ideas. Otherwise, it would be impossible to promote women's human rights in the changing world. The committee continues to increase awareness of the SOGI concept and the state parties' obligations toward LBTI women. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nadaria, for that very thoughtful and comprehensive overview of where the committee has addressed SOGI rights in terms of concluding observations and general recommendations, noting also that point about general recommendations 27 and 28 being adopted by vote and not consensus, and also a welcome commitment to never regressing on women's rights. So thank you so much. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge your committee colleagues who are also here listening and attending. So we have, in addition to Dr. Nadaria, Madana Rana is here, Hilary Gebedema, and Marian Bethel are all here. So thank you so much to the committee for making the effort to listen to these discussions, and particular thanks to you, Dr. Nadaria. So it's now, we will move to the contribution of the United Nations Independent Expert on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. Very unfortunately, Victor was called into an urgent meeting of the Human Rights Council with mandate holders and had to and is unfortunately not able to join us in person today, though he does hope to pop in tomorrow to our discussions. He has, however, sent us a wonderful pre-recorded contribution that I'm going to share with you all now. And that'll be, once we have Victor's contribution, we'll then move into a more open discussion and Q&A. Okay, so just bear with me while we manage the technology.
Dear colleagues, hello. I'm very grateful to the organizers of this conversation for the invitation to share with you a few ideas. I wish I could be there to participate more actively, but hopefully I can convey to you some of the work that my mandate is carrying out in relation to the issues that you will be talking about, and that will provide us with grounding for furthering the conversation in the future. As you know, I have the honor of being the independent expert on protection from violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. The mandate is crafted with the idea of, on one hand, providing visibility to the manner in which violence and discrimination occurs in the lived experience of lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and gender diverse persons around the world. And on the other hand, to identify effective measures that can be adopted by states to address and eventually eradicate such forms of violence and discrimination. When starting to carry out this mandate, I understood that certain issues were important points of departure. One of them, which I've seen confirmed throughout my work, is that the expressions lesbian, gay, bisexual, or trans reflect only to a limited extent the enormous diversity that exists in humankind, and they may or may not correspond to manners and political identities under which people identify themselves. The other is that the very concepts upon which the mandate is created, sexual orientation and gender identity, necessitate significant discussion within international human rights law with the purpose of ensuring coherence, including coherence in the doctrine and the jurisprudence of global and regional courts, commissions, and other bodies. That's part of the work that my mandate is hopefully contributing to, is that understanding of the manner in which these concepts are received in international human rights law, and what are the mechanisms that can provide us with processes and tools so as to promote cohesion and therefore a better understanding. And this is the first point that I wanted to share with you in this work of promoting a more active, perhaps richer receptions of these concepts by different treaty bodies, special procedures, and of course, the Universal Periodic Review as well. And I'm very pleased to know that in these panels, a colleague from the Cedaw is going to share with us their significant wealth of experience in relation to this matter. The work of analysis of violence and discrimination has taken my mandate to the development of a research agenda that has included topics such as criminalization, depathologization, legal recognition of gender identity, and social inclusion. In each one of these thematic projects, there has always been a demand from feminist organizations to ensure that the analysis is intersectional, but also very importantly, that there should be a differentiated approach according to different populations and communities. This is particularly relevant in the case of communities and populations that are historically disadvantaged even within populations historically discriminated against because of sexual orientation and gender identity. I'm referring, for example, to lesbian and bisexual women, in relation to whose situation very little data is gathered around the world. A lot less than what there is, for example, in relation to gay men. Some processes may reflect existing asymmetries of power even within the communities, but others may interact with processes such as the HIV/AIDS programming prevalent in many sections and latitudes in Africa, the Caribbean, Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe, where legal barriers may have made it very difficult to work on the basis of political identities, but allowed the creation of significant work on key populations of gay men and trans women, for example. So that example lets us know that we do know a lot about the health of gay men, precisely because those processes have been there over the last few decades. Other analyses of gender-based violence and discrimination were reflected in what was said to me in a recent submission to the mandate. And I quote, the submission said, "Gender is a social construct deeply embedded in society as a basis for making decisions on social, economic, and political inclusion and participation on one hand, and on exclusion and marginalization on the other." End of quote. For the very few, gender identity will contribute to the creation of experiences of privilege. For others, it will lead to experiences of discrimination and violence. That is often the case for women and persons whose gender identity does not fit squarely within the male-female binary, or fits within it in a manner that does not correspond to the preconceptions attached to our understanding of sex characteristics. For these reasons, gender-based analysis has been an indispensable tool in the development of jurisprudence dealing with cases of violence and discrimination. A broad understanding of gender is inclusive of gender-based discrimination impacting persons because of their real or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, and/or gender expression. And the interpretations issued by United Nations treaty bodies indeed suggest that these increasingly accept that gender-based analysis includes but transcends the male-female binary and requires an understanding of compounded discrimination. The Cedaw, for example, affirms that discrimination against women based on sex and/or gender is often inextricably linked with and compounded by other factors that affect women, such as being lesbian, bisexual, or trans. The Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights has established that the notion of the prohibited ground sex has evolved considerably to cover not only physiological characteristics, but also the social construction of gender stereotypes. Having analyzed the state failure to allow change of sex on official documents, the Human Rights Committee concluded that it was a form of discrimination because the government is failing to afford the author and similarly situated individuals equal protection under the law. Gender-based approaches are thus analytical tools in the consideration of root causes of violence and discrimination against lesbian, bisexual, and trans women, as well as other gender-diverse persons, inasmuch as departure from what are perceived as gender norms in a particular time and place are part of the causes of said violence and discrimination. Recent inter-American case law provides good examples of how gender-based analytical tools are applicable and pertinent to the analysis of violence against trans women. In Vicky Hernandez versus Honduras, a case that is currently pending of a judgment by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the Commission found in the merits report that the victim's death occurred in a context of discrimination based on prejudice that included police violence against LGBT persons, especially trans women sex workers, as was the case with the victim. In looking at what the case and its context demonstrate, the Commission specially noted the violence based on prejudice towards the gender identity and gender expression of trans women, and took into account that Vicky Hernandez and other trans women had essentially been forced into a cycle of violence by social exclusion leading to discrimination and criminalization. The Working Group Against Discrimination Against Women and Girls has similarly highlighted the dangers of ignoring gender identity and diversity. It has observed that women who do not conform to gender stereotypes, including some who may identify as lesbians, bisexual, and trans, are particularly vulnerable to discrimination, violence, and criminalization, and has noted, and I quote, "In the 1990s, queer theory also started using the term gender, challenging what is perceived as the binary understanding of gender, sex-gender dichotomy, and the heteronormative assumptions of some feminist approaches. The mandate has already identified amongst the circumstances that can unduly restrict freedom the male-female binary system on the basis of the sex assigned at birth and the idea that persons fall neatly and exclusively into that system." In the exploration of root causes of violence and discrimination based on gender identity, derived from the dictates of the resolution that gives me my mandate, I have gathered and systematized significant evidence about harrowing levels of violence against women, men, and gender diverse persons on the basis of their sexual orientation and gender identity. And I have concluded that, like other forms of gender-based violence, this stemmed from gender norms and stereotypes that are enforced by unequal power dynamics, and it's further aggravated when they intersect with other structural inequalities resulting in poverty, homelessness, and lack of job opportunities, or with other grounds for discrimination. I have particularly documented connected spirals of exclusion to which persons are subjected in connection with their gender identity, and I have noted that paradoxically, in the limited context in which data is gathered, there is abundance of proof that the situation continues. The University of Buenos Aires has produced research indicated that a trans woman is killed every 96 hours in Argentina. A survey by Stonewall with YouGov in Britain found that 4 in 5 LGBT plus people have experienced a hate crime or incident but did not report it to the police. My mandate has structured analysis around violence that includes killings, torture, and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, arbitrary detention, and other violations to personal integrity, as well as systematic discrimination manifesting itself in health, education, employment, and housing sectors, as well as measures that promote sociocultural inclusion, such as inclusive policies in relation to sports. Over time, United Nations human rights mechanisms have increasingly linked the phenomena of stereotype, social constructions, women oppression, and power. The Human Rights Committee has explicitly adopted gender-based frameworks in finding that the right to life must be respected and ensured without distinction of any kind, expressly forbidding distinction based on gender, acknowledging multiple and intersectional forms of discrimination, and these approaches place the victim's gender in the wider social context, acknowledging how social constructions of gender may mean that femicide and rape takes on a particularly egregious and discriminatory character, or have concrete implications for the analysis of cases brought to the consideration of treaty parties. I would like to commend, in that context, the conversation that you are about to have today. It's obvious that all of these issues are inextricably connected. And I would invite that in your conversations, you also explore the connection with urgent agendas, such as current narratives that question the prevalence of the human rights of trans persons, the notion that gender identity is a concept received in international human rights law, and the connection with all of these systems of power and asymmetries of power with foundational causes such as colonialism. This is a work in which my mandate is very much embarking over the next 2 years, and where I'm very much hoping to learn the result of your conversations, also to be able to bring them into the overview of the mandate of the independent expert. Again, thank you very much for this invitation, and I look forward to learning of the result of your work. Thank you very much.
So really rich contribution from the independent experts, starting by noting the under-documentation of many violations and experiences of LBT and non-gender normative women, noting also some promising developments from the inter-American system in this area. Throughout, I think noting the richness, potential richness of the term gender, and also raising at the end a call to action around urgent agendas. But to thank all of our opening contributors, in particular Dr. Nadaria, who's here, for I think giving us a wonderful opening to the next 2 days in terms of workshops, in terms of our discussions. So this is an opportunity really to have a more open discussion. I'm going to encourage the workshop participants to speak up, turn on your cameras, speak up, raise your hand. And particularly, I think I'd like to invite if any of the Cedaw committee members who are here have any reflections or contributions. Certainly we would be very pleased to hear from you. So with that, I think I might turn to my colleague Meghan, who I know has a couple of points that she'd like to make.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank both Leah and Victor for the really wonderful opening remarks. I have one question for Leah and then one question for one of our participants, Sandra Duffy. My first question for Leah is, how important is civil society in bringing forward issues of sexual orientation and gender identity for the work of the committee? Like, just how much do you need and rely on them to bring these issues forward? And my question for Sandra is around, Victor mentioned, I'm only bringing Sandra into this because I know she's written a wonderful article in Modern Law Review discussing some of these issues. And Victor talked about how even the terminology around sexual orientation, gender identity can unwittingly replicate colonialist patterns. I'm wondering if you could share some of your insights into how we even speak about these issues as in a way to ensure that we're not replicating colonial patterns or global North dominance.
Will I start?
Please do.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Civil society is crucial for life of treaty bodies. So we rely on data collected by civil society. So and I should say that in respect to LBTI questions, we are lacking data, and it is obvious that we do not have the same quantity of and quality data as in other areas of women's human rights. And it's a pity because I think we should our partnership is based on mutual exchange, on sources, on civil society, and I hope that entire process of data collection and work with treaty bodies will continue to evolve and develop and progress.
Okay, will I pick up next? Yeah. All right. Thank you very much for the question, Megan. It's I think quite an important point to make. I'm not sure if I'm. There we go. So first of all, I would just like to respond to Victor's contributions by saying it was incredibly important. As a scholar of, in particular, trans studies within law, I found his call to action with regard to defending the rights of trans persons to be really important. And I'm really glad that gender identity is such a focus of this workshop as well. With regard to the terms and the terminology we use and that are used within the UN itself, a lot of my research in this area has discovered that a lot of the terms that are used have historically been very westernized terms. So I use the term normative westernization. It has gotten better in that we have moved away from the terminology of LGBT to SOGI within the past decade or so. SOGI being sexual orientation and gender identity, but even that retains a focus which comes from a quite a Eurocentric, quite a Western viewpoint. So in relation to your specific question, Megan, with regard to the terms, just taking the terms lesbian, bisexual and transgender, those can be seen as a particularly Westernized view of relationships and gender identity that do not always reflect the diversity and the nuances of sexual and gendered identities that exist, especially in the global south. What is particularly noticeable, I suppose, in the context of women is that a lot of cultures have specific cultures of trans feminine persons or trans women or third gender persons with a feminine gender expression who, you know, suffer from both misogyny and transmisogyny, but are not necessarily included in what we would consider to be the Western definition of transgender, which is often seen as a binary transition from, you know, point A on the male or female binary to point B. And I just think it's quite important that we make sure that in order to reflect an actually global outlook, that we use language that is inclusive so that we recognize different cultures, different socially and culturally located identities, and that we don't attempt to put everybody into a constricted and quite westernized normative box. I can elaborate on any of that if you'd like me to, but
Thanks so much, Sandra. We've a couple of hands up here. So Ksenia and Loveday have asked to come in. Hi, Ksenia.
Hello. Hi, I'm Ksenia, and I work for ILGA World, which is a global LGBTI federation of organizations. And specifically, I worked a lot with Cedaw, and even before, when I was like a Russian human rights defender. So I have a lot of experience with Cedaw and specifically SOGI. I have a question to Cedaw members, but before, maybe I would just like to comment on the question regarding this terminology, because at ILGA World, we are thinking about what terminology would be the best, taking into account that indeed sometimes we leave behind specific cultural / gender identities, such as, for example, Hijra in India or Pakistan, and other identities as well. But for me, it's also as a feminist, intersectional feminist, and as a lesbian activist, for me, the question is also that when we shift from LGBTI to SOGI-esque, it means that we are losing these intersections between gender and sexuality specifically. And the LGBTI, just by definition, it includes these intersections, and specifically lesbian women. While when we are speaking about SOGI-esque, it's not like directly per se includes gender aspects. So that's just like what I'm thinking about, and how we can better address these issues, because even though, of course, intersectionality is not only about identities, but also systems of oppression, I think that situations of lesbian women should be also addressed and not, lost in all these discussions. And regarding the cultural identities, I know that because we work with different treaty bodies, I know that some of the committees, still not Cedaw, but some of the committees, they did address specifically the situation of Hijra, specifically I think in Pakistan, and it also relates to what information civil society provides, of course, but I think that there is one of the gaps that Cedaw maybe could address in the future, because indeed there are two-spirit people, for example, in North America, there are Hijras in India and Pakistan, there are also Fafine in Pacific, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of my thoughts about the terminology. And then the question to Cedaw committees. So Dr. Nadaria indeed shared that Cedaw made the highest number of recommendations on Lpti, and that's true because we are also analyzing and collecting this information since 2014, and we see that Cedaw is the most active among all other treaty bodies in this field. But my question is, what still remaining gaps you see in relation to sexual orientation or gender identity or Lpti? So what, at least in theory, in the ideal world, Cedaw could do more to advance the right of Lpti women and persons? So that's my first question. What are still remaining gaps? And the second question is, what are the impediments you face when you work to advance the rights of Lpti women and persons? Because maybe Human Rights Council, we can see it as more political. Cedaw, because it based its work on like treaty specific convention, we may think that it's more like less political and more legal. And therefore, maybe some people think that it affects to the last extent, by all these political interventions and different positions. But what is your opinion? Maybe it's like a composition of the committee, maybe it's pressure from the states, but what is the reasons why you have still like these limitations to advance more the rights of Lpti persons and SOGI-esque generally?
Those are really wonderful and rich questions. Thank you so much. Dr. Nadaria, I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond if you would like.
Yes, I will start from the last question. I think it's, I would not say that Cedaw is less political and more legal. Cedaw has its political heaviness, let's say so. Sure, we depend on composition of committee. Usually, this is a main what is we are working. Each of us brings our own aspirations, so has immense impact on decisions we make. I think that first of all, there is a lack of discussion. And I would say lack of academic discussion around the topic. I don't see enough briefings in this direction, enough interaction with academics, enough communication with state parties who press us. And there is always threat that, for example, that SOGI concept is a reason for withdrawal of Istanbul Convention, and if we start pushing forward issues connected with SOGI, and will be referring more frequently, it might cause threat to withdraw from Cedaw. So we are all the time under attack of outside political pressure. And it's voiced inside of the committee, though I can say that it's not supported by entire committee, but there is always hot debate, para after para. Every other occasion, the same arguments arise, and it's a bit tedious in a way that we can't move on forward. And I think there should be a greater link with academics, greater link with human rights outside, that will strengthen committee to voice itself, and not be all the time traumatized and harassed by threat from outside the world and political decisions of some very strong states. That's my personal view. So we need again to communicate better, and this is matter of communication, and it's matter of expansion of ideas, matter of communication with people on the ground. That's what treaty bodies are really lacking, and hope that Zoom will allow us to swim more openly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nadaria. That was that important call to action, and likewise a call to us in the academy to engage more directly and specifically on this issue. With that, I'm going to turn to my colleague Loveday. Loveday, would you like to contribute?
Hi, thanks, Catherine. I just wanted to, I suppose, continue that discussion in some respects. It's been the important discussion that's been raised by Dr. Nadaria about the politicization of the committee's work. In particular, I wanted to go back to the question of consensus, because we've touched on the important point that more recent general recommendations have not been adopted by consensus. That and I guess what we're indicating is a clear division within the committee, or certain areas where agreement can't be reached. And I wonder, this is a question for any committee member here, really, how whether that sort of, I guess, coincides with your understanding of what the committee's function is, to kind of face these divisions head on, and to accept the sort of challenging nature of some of the questions that are being raised here. So yeah, how does the lack of consensus figure in your understanding of what the committee's doing? Is it problematic, or is it invigorating? I guess would be one way of phrasing the question. And we've had, if I can just follow that up with a question that I think touches on a similar area. We've had a question in the question and answers from an anonymous attendee about plurality, with respect specifically here to Indian society and different laws governing marriage, And so I suppose the question extends to where those divisions are based on religious differences, not least, and cultural plurality. Does that add anything to the complexity of your task? So I don't know if that's manageable as a question, but those are certainly my own questions that I'm starting out with here. Thanks.
Yes, this is Marian Bethel speaking here, and I'd just like thank you very much for these questions, and I'd like to support what Nadaria has put forward as some of the issues that we face in the committee, which I think reflects the global context. And yes, I find it invigorating in regard to the question, part of the question that was asked, as to how do we move forward. And I think the alliances that we have now, the kind of workshop that we're engaged in this very moment, I think all contribute to us conceptualizing and imagining a way forward to Cedaw fully protecting the rights, human rights of the LBTI SOGI community. I think that is the goalpost, and as I've said, this particular kind of conversation with academics, NGOs, and other bodies, including the special rapporteur, are crucial to how we conceive of a way forward. And I think for my part, in terms of the convention itself and the binary of male-female that it has set up, I think there are definitely ways forward. We have GRs that are used to interpret the different aspects or articles of the convention. And yes, some are done by vote, some are done by consensus. Those that are reached by consensus are clearly more, clearly easier to use both internally and externally. And we do have the issue of GR 28, which interprets intersectionality and sexual orientation and gender identity. And there are difficulties moving forward when we, in terms of terminology, in terms of how gender itself, the word has evolved. It remains to some extent not evolving as in our understanding of it in the committee, and that is in the global context. But for my part, I think that every single article of the convention ought to include the SOGI LBTI women, every single article. I think Article 5, for example, which deals with social and cultural attitudes, ought to be used extensively to address this issue of SOGI and LBTI women in terms of stereotyping and how we in the community, in different communities, view that. I think temporary special measures under Article 7 is also crucial. Sorry, Article 4, temporary special measures ought to be given to the LBTI SOGI community in order to advance the cause of human rights for these women. And as we look at the CSW, Article 7, I think is important for women to LBTI women to step forward, to be to enabling environment for LBTI women to have political power, political decision making, and leadership in all levels. And so I think we in the Cedaw committee can bring these concerns under each and every article, and we must do that. It's not relegated just to health issues for the LBTI community or violence against the LBTI community, but every single article has the opportunity to introduce and advance the human rights of the LBTI SOGI community under Cedaw. And that is my position. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ms. Bethel, for coming in and for joining our discussions. I'm mindful of time. We have formally reached the end of the session. So before we bring it to a full conclusion, I first would like to note just an interesting question that's come in through the Q&A from our attendees, which is something that I hope we'll get to through the course of the rest of the next 2 days. Even if the Cedaw committee states SOGI in the recommendations, the convention itself is based on a gender binary. How do you think we could overcome this obstacle? So of course, that's something that we're trying to address in our full discussions. And before I wrap up completely, I would just like to give Dr. Nadaria an opportunity for the final word before we wrap up.
Thank you very much. And my final word will be that Cedaw was born as and was born based on gender binary, but it has evolved through its through the development of concept of gender. Let's start first of all from this, from all constructivist movements around which Cedaw absorbed in it. So today Cedaw is enough articulative to address intersectionality and multidimensional differences in sexual orientation and gender identity. That's my understanding. The way convention develops, there was no violence against women when Cedaw was born. There was no article covering violence against women. But we have developed one of the best jurisprudence on violence against women. And I think GR 35 is in a high level. So let's believe in evolution and progress.
Wonderful, thank you so much. That is I think such a fitting note on which to conclude our opening panel session. I just want to reiterate my thanks to Dr. Nadaria, to all the committee members who are here, and indeed to the independent expert who, whilst not here in person, has made a really wonderful contribution through his video. So we're going to formally conclude this session now. I'll invite you all to take a comfort break and to rejoin us at 3:30, where we'll move into our first thematic panel, which is looking at relationships and families. So thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us here for the first of the thematic panels of this workshop. We've got the discussions have got off to a wonderful start, so I'm delighted that we can give some space to the particular theme of family and relationship issues as they fall under Cedaw. There's been a little bit of a change of personnel on this panel. There's been a few last minute change of personnel, in fact. But I just want to, before I introduce our wonderful speakers, just say a word about why I think that this theme is really central to our thinking as organisers and to some of the issues that Cedaw faces. I mean, feminists have always sort of recognised the artificiality of the public-private distinction and the importance of family life, and for some feminist relationships of care have really been central to their thinking. I've been reading Sarah Ahmed recently, and she's really shaped my thinking on the importance of the creation of home and relationships of care for lesbian women in particular. And I think that really explains, I think, some of the focus that I've had, even intuitively, without understanding why, since the very start of my master's study into human rights, why relationships are formed the heart of that thinking, and what kind of obligations international human rights law may place on states with respect to relationships that we build that sustain us and making those relationships possible. But it's incredibly complicated. We've touched on a lot of these issues in the first panel, and I think this panel really gives us an opportunity to dig down into some of those questions of difference and diversity, plurality, questions of religion as well that come into play here when we begin to think about relationships, as well as questions of the plurality of gender as well that come into play. Some of the questions that have already risen touch on the different approaches that even within states that can emerge, and which we've experienced in the United Kingdom. So I think for my money, I think this is an area in which Cedaw has a really important contribution to make and a lot more to say. There's a lot more room that could be given to the question of relationship recognition. We've got a huge, I don't know whether we can think of it in terms of progress or whether that's too much, that exposes too much of a Western bias when we think about this. But we've certainly seen before other tribunals a kind of the question of decriminalisation as a starting point, and then leading up to formal recognition of relationships through marriage, addressing questions of parenthood as well, the positive obligations on states to enable individuals to create the family relationships that they want and to have those relationships supported and sustained through the state, because the state does a huge amount of work through its laws and structures in supporting family relationships. So these are some of the questions that we're going to touch on. We've unfortunately we're missing out today on Rosanna Flamer Caldera's contribution. She's been indisposed at the last minute, which I know I was really looking forward to hearing what Rosanna had to say. She's been working tirelessly in Sri Lanka for LGBTIQ equality, and she has been spearheading litigation campaigns there that include an international dimension. Hopefully she'll be able to. I'm putting words in her mouth when I say I would personally hope she can join us for tomorrow's discussion, but I've no idea whether that will be possible or not. We do have with us, I'm really delighted to say, Danielle Roberts. She's Policy and Development Officer at Here Northern Ireland, which is a community organisation that empowers, supports and advocates for lesbian and bisexual women and their families. Danielle is a qualified solicitor and also a long-term activist as well. Joining Danielle presenting today is Imani Kimiri, who's head of legal affairs at the National Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission of Kenya. The Commission is an organisation that is heavily involved in advocacy work, including the Repeal 162 campaign, referring to Section 162 and Section 165 of the Penal Code that criminalises same-sex relationships. The advocacy campaigns that they spearhead are both national and international. So again, I'm really looking forward to the contribution that Imani brings to us today and the perspective that both her and Danielle bring. And I'm equally really looking forward to the discussions we can have. There'll be plenty of space for discussions after these two presentations. But I think that's more than enough from me. I'm going to, if it's okay with Danielle, she's been put on the spot a little bit, but if it's okay to start with her, then I'm delighted to hand over to Danielle Roberts. Thank you, Danielle.
Thanks very much. Yeah, as well as an activist and a policy development officer, I'm also an ongoing PhD student at TGI. So yeah, several hats to choose from. So I'm going to speak a bit about the current situation for families in Northern Ireland. So I'm going to speak a bit about our marriage laws, which recently changed, which was good news, and our parental rights. And then I'm going to speak a bit about outstanding issues that we have. So I am sharing my screen, so I can't see the chat while I'm doing that, but hopefully if you have any questions, you can pop them in there and I can take them up after. So HereNI, as was already mentioned, is a community organisation and registered charity based in Belfast. So we have a few different strands of work. I do a lot of lobbying and consultation responses and advocacy to try and make the legal situation better for lesbian and bi women. We have a family support worker, a children's empowerment officer is her proper title, who runs a family group for same-sex parents and also a group for children of same-sex parents. So it's a group around building resilience and empowering children whose parents are LGBT. And we also jointly with Cara Friend have a gender-based violence support worker who works with LGBT women and girls who are at risk of or who have experienced gender-based violence. So we have a few different things going on. On top of that, we deliver training. We have a range of peer support groups. We have a lot of social groups. So there's quite a lot happening, whether there's a pandemic or not. So to start off with, talking about the legal status of relationships in Northern Ireland. 2020 was a big year for change. From October 2019, if you're not familiar with Northern Ireland government, we have several crises. The devolved government in Northern Ireland was collapsed for 3 years, and before it came back, Westminster, as the body with obligation for upholding our human rights, stepped in to take action on two issues, one being marriage equality and the other being abortion access. So that came in October 2019. By the time consultations were underway and paperwork was all sorted out, we introduced civil marriage ceremonies in February 2020. So it was just around Valentine's Day, which was quite nice. Then religious marriage ceremonies came later, and civil partnerships are still available. So these are now available to people of opposite genders or the same gender. So the choice is there for heterosexual couples to enter into a civil partnership as well, as same-sex couples to enter into a marriage, whether that's a religious or a civil ceremony. We also got conversion of civil partnerships to marriage towards the end of 2020. So now people who were in a civil partnership can convert that to a marriage if they choose, or they can continue with their civil partnership. So that has various benefits, including international recognition. Some of our members are in relationships with people from countries where they didn't recognize civil partnership. So for example, if you were from the UK, I'm married to somebody from France. France didn't recognise a civil partnership; they'd only recognise the marriage. So, so that has had some real legal benefits. One issue that we still have is that we don't have legal recognition of non-binary people, so there's no way for somebody to be to legally declare that their gender is non-binary. So the legislation does all talk about men and women. Now thinking about LGBT plus families, so I'm going to talk about a few different paths to parenthood, so adoption, surrogacy and assisted conception, focusing on assisted conception through a licensed clinic, whether that's NHS or privately funded, but not so much donor insemination because it doesn't confer the same legal rights. So adoption, after a few legal challenges, a Court of Appeal ruling in 2013 put in place that same-sex couples were able to adopt whether they were in a civil partnership or not, which was at the time marriage wasn't available. So currently the process is exactly the same for heterosexual couples, same-sex couples and single people. And there have been a number of children placed with same-sex couples, and we have heard good reports of people feeling that they're treated the same way and scrutinised the same way as any other couple would be. So that has been a positive development. Looking at assisted conception, so IVF and IUI, lesbian couples who are civil partners or married at the time of conception automatically are both considered legally the parents in Northern Ireland. If they're not civil partners or married at the time of conception, but conceived through a licensed clinic, then there's some paperwork to be filled in, but both can be considered legally mothers of the child from the time of conception. So this is full parental rights, just the same as a heterosexual couple who had conceived without assistance or with assisted conception. So this only applies through where the conception is through a licensed clinic, so either NHS or privately funded. It doesn't apply to home insemination. So if somebody uses a sperm donated by a friend or family member and self-inseminates at home, that doesn't confer any legal rights onto the non-birth parent. They would have to adopt the child, and the sperm donor isn't really classed as a sperm donor. They're classed as the father and can be on the birth certificate. So we would never recommend that people go down a home insemination route because legally it can be very messy. Surrogacy is currently under review, but it's not quite as clear cut. Whenever a woman who's a surrogate gives birth, she is legally the mother, and if she has a civil partner or a spouse, they are automatically treated as the second parent until a parental order is made. So that is currently under review, but at the minute with surrogacy, there is a court order after birth to transfer parental rights. Northern Ireland doesn't have a lot of surrogacy happening within Northern Ireland, but there are people who travel elsewhere to make use of surrogacy arrangements. So that's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on whenever the law is reviewed, and it's also something that our healthcare professionals currently aren't being really trained on. So it's a bit of a gap in knowledge in Northern Ireland. That is something that might come up more in the near future. So that's some rights that we have achieved, but there's not everything has been won. So I've mentioned assisted conception and that both mothers are legally parents through assisted conception in the examples I've given before. But there isn't an equality of access for lesbian couples as well as heterosexual couples. There's a requirement that you try unsuccessfully for a year before you get IVF treatment. And in some cases that's been interpreted for a lesbian couple as meaning you have to have private treatment for a year unsuccessfully before you can get NHS funded treatment. That's not equality of access. A lesbian couple trying unsuccessfully for a year is going to be either a very expensive process or one where they'll have to engage in risky behaviour health-wise and legally. There's also recently there's been regulations introduced for donor IUI, so intrauterine insemination, which is less invasive than IVF and would be more appropriate for quite a few lesbian couples. However, the funding that was allocated would only allow for 5 couples a year to go through treatment. So it's not sustainable, and it's certainly not adequate. While in Northern Ireland, both mothers are treated as legal parents named on the birth certificate with full parental rights. This isn't the case in the Republic of Ireland, where in most circumstances only the person who gives birth is recognised as the mother. This has, as well as massive emotional issues, it also has legal implications. For example, if a child is born outside the island of Ireland to a birth mother who is English and a non-birth mother who is from Northern Ireland and therefore entitled to Irish citizenship, the birth certificate will name both parents, but the Irish government will only consider the birth parent. So because she is English, the Irish citizenship can't pass to the child. And we've had a number of people who have had issues getting an Irish passport who have been flat out rejected, and even one who has been told their passport was issued in error because the Irish government doesn't recognise both parents as legally being parents. This has issues for our friends in the south. Equality for Children are currently campaigning on this issue, and I would encourage you to look out for any articles by them, because they are certainly more of an expert on it than I am. But there is a real issue of lack of recognition for same-sex parents by the Irish government, and that seeps in to people who engage with HereNI, because in Northern Ireland, by right, we can be British, Irish or both, but at the minute that right isn't afforded to all the children of people who are entitled to Irish citizenship. Gender-based violence legislation, Northern Ireland is pretty behind the rest of the UK when it comes to gender-based violence legislation. We are currently in the process of a stocking bill going through. We don't have upskirting legislation. We're working on strangulation as a standalone offence legislation. So there's a lot of work going on gender-based violence legislation, and we are trying to make sure that includes where perpetrators are in a lesbian relationship as well, that it's not a heteronormative assumption, and that there's support and targeted and adequate support available for LGBT people who are victims or survivors of gender-based violence. There's also a number of social inclusion strategies currently working through Stormont. I did mention that Stormont does go through periods of crisis. We're hoping that we aren't about to have another one. We're in a position where we're waiting to find out who the next First Minister is going to be, but hopefully, all being well, Stormont will not CAPS, and the social inclusion strategies will continue to be developed. So there's one on poverty and one on disability. And then HereNI sits on the co-design groups for the gender equality strategy and what's currently called the LGBTQI+ strategy. So we are hopefully going to go some way to having recommendations for government and measures to hold them to account. Potential things that Cedaw could consider. We've had really great success with Cedaw in Northern Ireland on access to abortion in particular. The Cedaw inquiry found that there was a grave and substantial violation of human rights because of the position where people were forced to travel for an abortion or to carry a pregnancy to term. So those recommendations from Cedaw were massively helpful for judicial reviews and later for legislation being developed. Other issues that for LGBT people, particularly LGBT young people, that are very pertinent are access to education and access to healthcare. Another issue, which is one that I know has been popping up in the chat box a wee bit, is the use of language, gender neutral or non-binary language. I don't have an answer. I think it's important that we keep talking about women. When we talk about abortion access in particular, we talk about women and pregnant people, because not everybody who can and will get pregnant is a woman, but there's also particular impacts of misogyny. So yeah, I know, why not both is a bit of a cliche, I guess, but yeah, should we use gender neutral language or non-binary language? But then how do we also centre women and tackle misogyny? So I don't have an answer, but I guess it's a discussion that's probably going to go on for a while. The reason I've picked out education and health these are some statistics. I'm not going to go through them all, but one of the key ones is that 2/3 of young people in Northern Ireland, LGBT young people, didn't feel that they were welcomed or valued within school. That's massive, and almost half of LGBT young people didn't feel like school was safe for them. This is research conducted by our own Department of Education. So there are massive issues with accessing education for LGBT young people. And then mental health and LGBT people. Mental health levels in Northern Ireland, or there's high incidences of poor mental health. We are a post-ceasefire society, if not a post-conflict society. But if we look at the LGBTQ+ community, particularly younger people, there's massively high levels of poor mental health. Just to draw your attention to the bottom, LGBT young people are 3 times more likely to contemplate suicide than heterosexual young people, while trans people are almost 5 times more likely to contemplate suicide, and also 5 times more likely to be diagnosed with and medicated for depression. So access to healthcare is something I'm sure will come up with Alexa tomorrow. Our trans healthcare is abysmal. I'm not going to speak about that today, but as well as access to reproductive healthcare, including assisted conception and abortion access, mental health and trans health are all massively under-resourced, and people aren't getting the care that they have a right to. Just to end on a positive note, the successful use of Cedaw. So I've mentioned the inquiry that Cedaw conducted into abortion access in Northern Ireland, and in 2019, the same act that brought in equal marriage also incorporated 2 recommendations of the inquiry report, which called for abortion access and also combating gender stereotypes, particularly that which highlight that a woman's main role is as a mother, which is something that even our former First Minister was told by her party colleagues. And then also calling for comprehensive relationship and sexuality education. So the Cedaw inquiry process has been used successfully in Northern Ireland to bring about legislative change. And I think, yeah, maybe it's something we could deploy on other issues as well. And that's me finished. So there's some contact details for me and for HereNI, if you want to have a look to see what else we do. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for that wonderful contribution, Danielle. I think it not least highlights for us all the layers of laws and legislation and the patchwork that goes on to constructing the family in national and international law. So once we start addressing these questions, it raises this whole host of complexities for us, and not least the one thing we can see there, which really jumped out to me, is that question that we addressed right at the start, is how do you create categories of inclusion without then creating the exclusions that follow from them? And that, so you highlighted some of those exclusions beautifully there. So thank you for that really careful overview of what's happening in your jurisdiction. On this note, I think we're going to press on to the next presentation. We won't pause for questions just yet or contributions. If it's okay with Imani, I'm going to pass straight over to Imani Kimiri. Yeah, let's hear from you. Catherine, can you spotlight?
Thank you so much, Loveday. My name is Imani Kimiri. I am a feminist. I am queer. I am also bisexual, and I am a lawyer. So I identify under so many hats, maybe not as big as all other people who've spoken before me, but yeah, I really am proud of things that I hold and the hats that I hold. My pronouns are also Imani or they. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share very, very shortly on what instances queer folks, and in particular lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex, non-binary folks who are perceived to be women face and what their realities are. So I would allow me shortly to begin with the institution that I work for. I work with an organization called the National Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission, and our objectives are usually to promote and protect the equality and inclusion of LGBTIQ individuals in Kenya, and meaningful participation in society. So that would range from instances where we would participate in strategic litigation, where we go to court and demand for instances that have been included in international laws and treaties and covenants, and also in Kenyan laws as enshrined in Kenyan laws, so that LGBTIQ persons can have a wholesome life to aspire to, right? We also try in numerous ways to offer legal aid, civic education training, paralegal training, so that we are in a community of queer people who understand at least what the law is and what the law means to them, and means in which they could be protected or we could be protected in the law. So how do we navigate the society as queer human rights, queer persons living in Kenya? So, and in particular to the session that talks about family as a right that is supposed to be, enjoyed by LGBTQI persons in Kenya. How do we go about it? So in Kenya, the biggest problem is, I want to say homosexuality, the biggest problem is homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, in relation to criminatory laws that are enshrined in our laws of Kenya. So we have these sections that you've had numerously spoken about, known as sections 162 and 165, which talks about unnatural offenses, where every person who is presumed to have carnal knowledge, and carnal knowledge in this instance is talking about adult consensual same-gender or same-sex relations, and in private, then if this person is convicted of the crime, then this crime accords them about 14 years in jail. Another sections of the law that are attached, section 62 and 65 of the Penal Code, are sections 11A of the Sexual Offences Act, which talks about indecent acts within adults. So these are sections of the law that are particularly used to persecute LGBTIQ individuals, and more so persons who engage in consensual adult same-sex or same-gender relationships or liaisons. So in an event that a person is even presumed, or is presumed that their sexual orientation is different from what is perceived to be the norm, then we have the state and state actors actually enforce these sections of the law and take them through processes, and processes are very strenuous, and ensure that the rights to dignity of LGBTIQ individuals in Kenya are infringed on, and therefore ensuring that a lot of us are living in a state of fear, a constant state of we are not able to interact and live as true to ourselves as we are. And what is the trueness in this nature, right? And in particular in relation to Article 16. So I want to give you a small background of a strategic litigation case that is currently ongoing in court. Currently, it's at the Court of Appeal, but it's Petition 150 and 234 of 2016, which numerous human rights defenders, allies, NGOs, and CSOs alike petitioned the court to have these sections of the law struck from the law. Sections 162 and 160 talk about unnatural offenses. And we went through the whole court process from 2016. And in 2019, on May 24th, we had the High Court actually rule that the case did not bear any merit because the rights of the minority cannot overwhelm or overrule the rights of the majority, which is not a true nature when you're looking toward the rule of constitutionalism and the rule of law, right? Minorities, the rights of minorities are supposed to be constantly protected so that you can ensure that there's a democratic state where all persons are protected, right? And amongst the issues that the judges raised when they were throwing out our petition in regards to Report 162 was one such reason is LGBTIQ individuals would be seeking the right to marry, which in their opinion would be a detriment to the family as a unit because one, it would, in their opinion or in the societal opinion, it will bar procreation because in no way or form would anyone imagine LGBTIQ individuals would have families without procreating. How do you procreate? How do same gender folks procreate, right? Another reason it would be, and in the right to family, they actually stated that Kenya as a state is not ready to embrace instances where same-sex and same-gender couples can actually cohabit and live freely within and literally have the right to engage into a marital partnership, right? So that in numerous ways, and looking into instances that Kenya actually ratified the Cedaw Convention about 36 years ago. I think it was in 1986. And looking at all my predecessors who spoke before me in instances where the commission, actually the convention, was talking about realizing protection and anti-discriminatory laws towards LGBTIQ individuals. So how is withholding the right to marry or bringing about the right to be, for LGBTIQ individuals to be in a marriage, or in a partnership, how does that then realize the full intention of the Cedaw Convention, right? In other instances, when you're looking into adoption, for instances of LGBTIQ persons, the Children's Act of Kenya and sections 158 clearly stipulates sections of the law and gives grounds to which people are not allowed to adopt, or grounds of refusal to adopt, So one such, amongst numerous grounds of persons have to have sound mind. If you're a convicted felon, then you cannot have the right to adoption, or a grant to adoption cannot be issued to you. Amongst other issues, they also mention that being a homosexual is a ground that a person who identifies as LGBTIQ cannot adopt and give a child a home. What does that mean? Does that mean that we are unfit? Are we clustered in instances where LGBTIQ individuals cannot have families because we are considered as our basic existence is considered as an illegal stature, right? So it's such an issue in instances where people have, want to go the step further and welcome, they're able to bring about people in their families and want to bring about children who they're able to cater to, then they are barred by such sections, which for me is very discriminatory, and it also bars like someone's right to live in the enjoyment of their rights to their full extent, right? We also look at instances where LGBTIQ persons in Kenya, by the basic virtue of us being considered as a criminality or a criminal beast, we do not enjoy the rights that are enshrined in Article 16, basic rights like rights to ownership of property, whether it's ownership that is passed off to us from families or our parents who might have had such properties, and in the form of inheritance of the properties is what I mean. And why would I say that we do not have such access? It's because the organization I work for comes across so many instances of people who have been rejected by their families because of their sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics. So they do not have that access to gain properties that would have been acquired to them through inheritance. They are totally weird. In instances, we have been totally rejected by our families, disowned from our families. So we are not the law in itself, you have to go, there's a saying that they say in the courts, you have to go to equity with clean hands. So how do you then go to the courts to inquire of your rights to property, to ownership of property, and state that one of the grounds in which you were denied such property is because you identify as LGBTIQ, which is also such a very big problem, right? And also instances where we have experienced numerous clients who come to us and they state that they were coerced or forced to be in, I want to say, marriages that suit their particular people who are forcing them into marriages because they were in one time or another either outed because of their sexual orientation, SOGI status, or and then their family, because of cultural persuasions and religious persuasions, then forced LGBTIQ individuals in numerous instances to be in marital relationships because they did not want to be subjected to the shame that came from people in the community being aware that their children identified as such. So you find instances where once the spouses are aware of such instances, it deteriorates to an instance where there's physical harassment and violence, sexual violence, which goes to numerous instances of corrective rape, and also domestic violence. But we live in a society where LGBTIQ people in Kenya are not very forthright in presenting these matters to state actors, because they know in the background that they are going to be further persecuted if they stipulated that one of the reasons as to why they were persecuted or they were in this instance of violence that that was occasioned to them was because of their sexual orientation and gender identity. So how does in particular Cedaw come to how can Cedaw be particularly meaningful in ensuring that there's protection for LGBTIQ individuals? I want to say, like my previous panelists, what they mentioned is, yes, we should at all times be able to bring about instances and verbiage that includes transgender and gender non-conforming persons and intersex persons. Kenya has been very progressive in that we, in the past 5 years, have had so much research in regard to intersex people, to the extent that intersex people were actually enumerated in the last census, which happened in 2019. And intersex folks were actually enumerated as a different gender from the particular, the generic male and female binary. So there was the intersex binary that was, whether you're intersex, then you are, known to be intersex by the government. And the government is also bringing about numerous policy and different policies based on people who identify of a different sex characteristics. There's also numerous laws and precedent that has been set by court, but in which the government or the state has been reluctant or has neglected or has been negligent in upholding numerous precedent that has been very progressive in regards to protection of LGBTIQ individuals, and in particular, and in instances where precedent has been set, then you find that, and it's particularly not only in LGBTIQ instances, but in general instances that also involve human rights, human rights persuasions. The government it's been a push and pull to have the state actually, adhere to the pronouncements of a court. I think I'll end it at that unless I have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Imani. That was a really rich and wonderful presentation. For me, the really important message that came across there was the interconnectedness of rights and the complexity where we think that relationship recognition may be presented as a straightforward matter, just the range of rights that are implicated in this discussion are just quite breathtaking and really demonstrated in a very clear way through your presentation. So thank you so much for that, Imani. I want to now open the floor for discussion. We have, as previously, we have some panelists here who are able to open their screens and ask their questions directly. For those of you who are on, otherwise on Zoom but not able to voice your question, then please do type your questions away. I've got the Q&A open now and I'm keeping an eye on that. So we'll be taking questions from both directions. So what how I would like to start is by encouraging our panelists here and other people who are here live to raise their hands if they have a question. And I'm going to kick off with Senya, if that's okay, because I can see she's got her hand up and is eager to kick us off. So Senya.
Yeah, thank you. And generally, it's such a wonderful panel and such a wonderful exchange of views. I have some comments on both of the presentations, and the first one, which was about family and Cedaw. For me, it's also a question of who is the other subject, and because I'm also I have different hats as an international human rights defender, also having a background in local advocacy, and trying to do my PhD with the University of Leicester. So for me, it's usually personal is political, and I can just share one story that happened to my friends, and that shows how sometimes the lack of intersectional analysis, including the analysis of Cedaw, could actually affect the real lives of people. So I have friends who are a couple of kind of lesbian couple, and one of the women, she is a cisgender woman, and the other woman is a trans woman. So they gave birth to a child who is biologically connected to both of them, and then they moved to the UK because one of them was working there. And then they wanted to change to obtain basically the birth certificate that would indicate both of the women as parents. And the problem was that the UK legislation that we would probably see as progressive, because it could recognize two women from the birth of the child as co-mothers. But the problem was that this legislation is connected to assisted reproduction and all these things, meaning that because in case of my friends, they gave birth to a child in the other way, and the child is biologically connected to both of them. In this case, they were not able to obtain the birth certificate. The trans woman was asked quite intrusive and illogical questions. For example, from what moment you started to realize that you are a trans woman? And of course, it's not like you're just one moment, one morning, you just wake up and realize that you're a trans woman. So it was, we can think about, for example, the UK or other countries as really progressive, but for me, the question is who is the other and who is left behind? And here we can see that actually the UK, yes, the UK adopted quite progressive legislation about lesbian women, cis lesbian women. But when it comes to the intersections between sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender, it's still the problem. And well, unfortunately, we were trying to bring this case during the country review of the United Kingdom by Cedaw, and it was not transformed into any recommendations, but that's just one example of how intersectional analysis could allow us to actually see who are left behind. So that's about this first part of the presentation. Second, I have also some ideas about Imani's presentation. And so I'm originally from Russia and I still have a Russian passport. And as you can imagine, Russia is not the most, LGBTI friendly country. And for me, the question was always all this international law, how we can rely on this. Because when our countries are not keen to implement the recommendations, do we actually need to spend all these limited resources to fight for our rights on the international area? And the second thing is, and I will be talking about this more tomorrow, is that the positive result is not always guaranteed. And for instance, I had a case related to hate speech against me, and I brought the case to the Cedaw, and the communication was considered as inadmissible, meaning that I was not able to get justice not only in my own country, but also in Cedaw. And as Mari Matsuda was saying about hate speech and all these minority groups, that when your government is not protecting you, you are basically a stateless person at the end. And that's kind of my feeling. But when you cannot also get this protection on the fora, which you would consider as like, progressive feminists and so on and so forth, and you receive negative results, that also like, it has also some implications. And maybe my question is to Imani is that like how you maybe rationalize for yourself why you use international mechanisms, because I still believe in international law and in Cedaw. And for me, it's more like, resistance, because we want to be the part of the human rights agenda. We want to be a subject. We want to be there, and we want to form the agenda. And therefore, for me, it's also like the fight. It's also resistance. I don't want to be invisible. So that's how I am trying to rationalize why I'm still working in this space. And I just wanted maybe to ask Imani what the position of communities in Kenya, because I can imagine that it's also could be problematic for you. And my last idea is about like marriage, because especially in the feminist jurisprudence, the marriage and same-sex marriage was criticized a lot by feminists specifically because, it's all patriarchal institutions and so on and so forth. But I also think that in part it can be about this like colonial or post-colonial thinking, because like I am coming from Russia when we never had same-sex marriages or any protection for LGBTI people. And for me as a lesbian woman, for me, it's really important to have access to marriage, to same-sex marriage, and to be able to be recognized as my partner. And it's not, for me, it's not just to, to confirm to traditional norms, but for me, the very act of being in a marriage, it's like a anti-patriarchal resistance. And for me, it's also the opportunity to build alternative and feminist universe in this marriage. So I was also talking to some of my friends from South Africa who was also kind of sharing with me that when we as, for example, lesbian women, when we created marriages, for us, it's not just conforming to patriarchal stereotypes, but it's also about building other alternative realities. And I just maybe wanted to mention this, that there is a lot of criticism of same-sex marriages, specifically in what we call global north, because it's like this patriarchal. But I think that maybe for people who are actually based in lesbophobic, patriarchal, LGBTI-phobic countries, it can be a bit different. So that's kind of my input, and I would love to hear from you any feedback on this. And thank you so much again for organizing this discussion.
Thanks for that intervention, Senya. The audience will now get a sense of how lucky I am to have such a wonderful PhD student, and we'll be hearing more from Senya tomorrow in the final panel, as she said there. I'm going to ask Imani if she has a response at this stage to that question. I will turn to Danielle as well. I'm particularly intrigued I'm not sure, I don't want to put you on the spot, but the question about feminist approaches to marriage was one that particularly caught my ears. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but I'll see. Don't feel compelled, but perhaps I'll start with Imani, and then after that we have a question in the wings from Meghan, and I'll come back to that next. But Imani, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the questions. There were quite a few. So if I forgot any questions like that you raised, just let me know so that I am able to come back to them. So how do we specifically rely on international law? So we have a constitution that talks about international law as a source of law in Kenya. So all laws that have been ratified by Kenya as a state, which then form laws in Kenya. So in instances where we want to say, for example, go to court for an instance of strategic litigation, like the Repeal 162 case that I was just talking about in regards to unnatural offenses, then we cite instances in international law and jurisprudence that are actually useful in that matter. So then it gives judges and magistrates and judicial officers a broader perspective of what to exactly look at and compare it with when coming to decisions. So it's very important. And so our organization also uses international law as, I want to say, a basis of comparison on what exactly we would imagine that would bring about equality and protection of LGBTIQ individuals in Kenya. So in instances where, and sadly because of colonization, a lot of laws, if not all, actually, all laws that were in Kenya prior to repealing of some sections or, like overhaul, removal of some laws in Kenya and creation of laws were actually adopted from the colonial masters, right? So all these laws form a basis of us being in a situation where we have to ape a lot, or we have to borrow a lot from people or states that have been progressive or have actually litigated or use legislature to change and shape laws that actually are beneficial to the society, right? So those are instances as to why we have to use them. And another instance is also in regard to advocacy. Our advocacy is not particularly targeted to the state, right? It's also targeted to the general public. It's targeted to state actors and the state in different ways, like targeted to the Ministry of Health, the judiciary, police officers, health workers. So we would use instances where we know that there's the general principle that international law and domestic law alike sets certain requirements that should be adhered to. And that's where we would use them in advocacy and changing the mindsets of people who actually, would create the general public, if that makes sense. Like bits and pieces of people, it's not just the giant. You have to do so much work within like numerous instances so that you're able to achieve the goal that you're going to. It might actually be something that is strenuous or something that takes a longer time to achieve a particular goal. But I think all these instances of advocacy in different instances make life better or easier. You wouldn't compare, in an example, the situation of LGBTIQ individuals in Kenya right now in 2021 to the situation that it was in 2006, right? So the law is still discriminatory, it's still homophobic, transphobic, but there are different ways in which policy may have been amended or created to ensure that some things here and there make life easier for LGBTIQ. How do we use international mechanisms? So we are engaged also in the regional community through the African Charter on SCHPR. And we also do shadow reporting for numerous instances of the UPR mechanism, the International Covenant Against All Forms of Torture and Degrading Treatment and Inhumane Treatment, the ICSCR. So in different ways, we find that missions are able to, issue recommendations to the state in ways that we, as the lay person or the layman, the citizen in Kenya wouldn't be able to, because the state would sort of adhere to what is being brought about by different missions as opposed to what the citizens in Kenya might need, because they would think that there are repercussions that would be coming about, that would come about in an event that they do not adhere to, recommendations by state. For example, Article 16 of the Cedaw Convention was actually ratified by Kenya. So, there's a presentation in which Kenya would be, or would envision itself towards different missions, but that does not reflect directly to how they ensure protection of all citizens' rights in Kenya. So what is my take on patriarchy in same-sex and same-gender relationships? Unfortunately, this is something that has been programmed, particularly to all of us. And it is something that it takes a lot of unlearning. And I'm sure a lot of us are still unlearning these processes, because there are instances, say, 10, 20 years ago, that people would not understand how women who are presumed to be both masculine presenting can be in a relationship. Then you would have, for example, cishet people ask, who's a woman, who's a man? Growing from a situation that we can actually perceive that women, whatever roles that they play, does not have to have a construct of male and woman, or male-female binaries, or roles have been optioned to families. But the processes are usually very slow. And that I blame a lot of this on religion and culture. We are still based in a situation where, for instance, every 5 years, we vote against tribal lines, even if, for the previous 5 years, we would be in cahoots with whoever our neighbors are, but without knowing what their tribe is. So it actually goes down to also lines that have been created, binaries that have been created based on people being male and female. And this is particularly so difficult, especially if you come or you reside from rural areas. Then you wouldn't be able to even stay with your partner because of the constant reminder or imagination, or the degradation that comes from the people who you imagine are your community because of your sexual orientation. The position for communities in Kenya, especially LGBTIQ communities in Kenya, is these constant violations that we experience, as I mentioned earlier on, that range from murder to corrective rape to being jailed for same-sex engagement, to being denied even the right to have a family, to people being suspended or expelled from school once they've been outed by their families because of their sexual orientation. We see numerous people and stories on the media, because we do media monitoring of children who have been expelled from school, denied the right to basic education because they identified, or people presumed, that their orientation was not the norm. I think I want to end at that. Over.
Thank you very much. That was just a wonderful answer. What I love about feminist engagement with international law is that we're very good at being pragmatic in the way we approach international law. We don't kind of reject it entirely as a useless tool, but we don't hang everything on it. And you've really kind of talked us through some of that really well. So thank you, Imani. I'm just going to turn to Danielle now. There's a bit of a discussion going on in the chat about marriage. I don't know if that's something you want to pick up or any other points, but I'll pass over to Danielle.
I think it's probably a similar pragmatic approach. Marriage gives legal rights that other relationships don't have. I think symbolically for Northern Ireland, equal marriage was massive. We are in a context where, listening to Imani speak about Kenya and things, I kind of feel like I need to wind my neck in and not. But we have homophobic politicians. it's not that long ago, a former First Minister said if homosexuality was criminalised again, that they would hope people would follow the law. So I think symbolically, equal marriage coming in and it being thousands of people taken to the streets in support was massive for affirming LGBT relationships. But practically, it also helped address some things like trans people had to choose between either getting divorced or getting a gender recognition certificate. So I do think you can be a feminist and be married. I don't think marriage is, I think marriage is what you make of it, not necessarily what it was historically. But we also have the option now of civil partnerships for people who want to have a legally recognized relationship, regardless of the gender of their partner, without the sort of institutional hangovers of marriage. So yeah, I think particularly for things like, we know people who haven't been allowed to be next of kin for their long-term partner and to make healthcare decisions because the relationship hasn't been legally recognised. So yeah, I think it is important, and I don't think it's, I understand there's plenty of discussions happen about, yeah, can you be, yeah, is this assimilation? Is it still queer? I think it's what you make of it. So yeah, I think you can be in a queer marriage. Yeah. and the legal benefits that come from it. Maybe we need to look at other things as well, like kinship groups and stuff like that. But to me, that's not material reality yet. So it's all a bit theoretical.
Thank you. I'm sitting here feeling increasing sympathy for the committee members that we have here and elsewhere and the challenges they face in delivering on some of these questions. So yeah, absolutely standing in awe right now of yeah, your role. We've got a couple of people here waiting patiently. If it's okay, I will stick to the order that I suggested and turn to my colleague Meghan here to ask her, or to make her contribution or ask her question first, and then we have Sandra Duffy. I'll come to you after.
Great, thank you both for those great presentations. I have questions for each of you. Danielle, I'm wondering if you could talk through or just comment on the role of positive obligations in respect of SOGI and equal rights, because you can see from your presentation, particularly in thinking about reproductive choices, that it's great if there's no sort of a formal ban on accessing IVF or IUI or any other options that might exist, but if you don't have the money, you don't really have an option. So what kind of positive obligations are there for the state to facilitate or fulfill those reproductive choices, so it's not just illusory or just sort of on paper, but actually exists in reality for people? And Imani, I have two questions for you. And Danielle, you can, this first question probably also resonates in Northern Ireland, is just asking what kind of tools or what kind of things does the Cedaw committee need to provide as advocacy tools for dealing with conservative, religious, and traditional norms that are constantly pushing up against SOGI rights? How can the Cedaw committee position itself in a way that provides tools and arguments that can be used within your various domestic settings? Because it's so interesting, Imani, that we can see they're keeping the criminalization as a way to protect the family. And that's, I'm assuming, it has some religious, conservative, traditional norms about what a family is. And my second question, Imani, is that we can see from the earlier presentations today that the committee's been quite clear about sexual orientation, gender identity need to be included as a ground of discrimination. And I know in Article 27 of the Kenyan Constitution, it's not. I know it was very contentious in the drafting. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on whether there is any strategic litigation thinking about going in that direction, or if kind of activists and people on the ground in Kenya feel this is not the strategic moment to be bringing litigation to include sexual orientation as a ground of discrimination.
Thank you very much. I might just see if Sandra Duffy's is a contribution. Well, I think what we'll do, we'll pass over to the presenters to answer Meghan's, and then we'll give Sandra the floor after the speakers have just responded to Meghan's. That seems the best way to do it. So perhaps Danielle first. if that's okay, and then Imani this time.
I suppose positive obligations under Section 75 of the Good Friday Agreement, there's a duty for public bodies to not discriminate against people of different protected characteristics with. Oh, I muted myself, I think. So there are Section 75 obligations for public bodies, but even with that obligation and regulations, the main issue we have at the minute for access and assisted conception is funding. The regional fertility clinics, or the NHS provider, isn't getting the funding, isn't getting the staffing levels, doesn't have the resources to deliver to more than 5 people a year, like when it comes to donor IUI. So, and that's for lesbian couples and single women. So it's not, and they're doing the best they can. They're trying to redirect funds from other bits of budget. But at the minute, it's not meeting demand, and people are going to age out of waiting lists, which is, yeah, reproductive healthcare is time sensitive in a lot of cases. And then I know it's not exactly what you asked, but despite the Cedaw recommendations being incorporated into the 2019 Northern Ireland Act and abortion regulations being put in place, our Department of Health has refused to commission services. So while we have law on paper, they're still saying they've got no duty to commission services. So healthcare professionals are trying to use what resources they have and redirecting them from other sexual health services without getting training and the support that they need to deliver services that we've been told, if we don't have those, it's a grave and systematic violation of our human rights. So I don't know whether positive obligations as well as legislation, so stuff on paper and international, doesn't necessarily mean we get the outcomes still. Yeah, which is why we still have to do some agitating.
Thank you. I'll jump straight over to Imani, if I may.
Thank you so much, Danielle, and yeah, thank you, and Loveday. I had 2 questions, and on the first, let me answer the first one. What is the basis of inclusion of sexual orientation or gender identity as a ground for discrimination under Article 27? And in fact, this is a very good thing that has come up. In Kenya, LGBTIQ persons have actually litigated in different cases, as opposed to the one that I mentioned on Repeal 162, on matters based off the freedom from discrimination, freedom of expression, freedom of association, amongst other issues. And in 2 different petitions, and one of the petitions was a judicial review that was brought about by Transgender Education and Advocacy in 2013 through the Executive Director, SOGI, in regards to freedom of association for trans ITGNC persons, that's trans, intersex, and GNC, and gender non-conforming persons in Kenya. And on the pronouncement, on the delivering of the ruling, the judges in the matter actually included gender identity as one of the grounds that a person cannot be discriminated against. So the law in Kenya is normally shaped through different ways. And the High Court in Kenya is actually allowed to make pronouncements and make precedent that actually form the law in Kenya. So by virtual pronouncement that gender identity should be included as a ground against discrimination, that makes it that people cannot actually be discriminated against gender identity. And to the second strategic litigation case that actually went through court. It was Petition 440 of 2013 that was taken to court back then, and then there was a pronouncement that was delivered in 2015, where sexual orientation was actually also included as a ground that people cannot be discriminated against. Now, the problem is freedom from discrimination is not an absolute right. It's actually limited. So there are ways in which, even if these pronouncements, different pronouncements have actually been made to include sex to mean, and sex and gender to mean sexual orientation and gender identity and expression, but state actors can still, manipulate the law, and it can be actually interpreted that it's not an absolute right, which is something that we still struggle with because of how progressive the courts are, but the practice is not as, it hasn't yet caught up with how, the pronouncements are made in court. There has been numerous strategic litigations cases that have actually been won from 2017 in regards to sex characteristics all the way till to date, where different people are litigating in court, but the general society and the general public has actually not caught up with the progression of the laws and the court, right? I think the tools that would be available to litigants, and not only litigants, but people who are activists in Kenya in regards, and all around us in regards to how we implement the Cedaw Convention is actually it comes into looking at how do Cedaw, as how do you ensure that there's follow-up in pronouncements that have actually been made? How do you ensure that there's enforcement? How do you ensure that all persons are included, as opposed to just being the binary of male and female? Because we, to be honest, like the numerous countries that are even more developed than what we would presume, have not even achieved that equality. But how do you ensure that no state is lagging behind? How do we ensure that there's actually all of us, like, you get accountable, or you issue accountability to states to ensure that there's something that is not only on paper, but something that is enforceable, right? Something that they are put to test to enforce, and put or ensure that there are existing laws or repeal laws that are actually discriminatory, and include them in, legislation or just general government advocacy. Because you would actually have, there would be a stepping stone, or like, I want to say privilege, that would be accorded to you as opposed to me, as I've said before. How do you ensure that you enforce these instances? Over.
Thank you so much. We have an intervention from Sandra Duffy, which I'm very much looking forward to. I just want, before I pass over to her, I just want to flag up that we probably have not much more than absolute maximum 10 minutes left. So I'm just giving the committee members here a little bit of a flag waving opportunity to say, if you have any comments you'd like to make after this next intervention, it would be wonderful to hear from you. No, obviously that's over to you. Please use the raise hand function if you'd like to make a contribution. But for now, over to Sandra, if I may.
Thank you. I'm going to be quite quick because there are far more relevant people to be hearing from than me, and hopefully some of the committee members would like to come in on these issues. I just have a really quick response to Ksenia and to Imani with regard to marriage, and this is something that Danielle picked up on as well. It's not. So as both a personally queer and politically queer person, I am like down with heteronormativity, down with patriarchy, etc., as I think many of us would agree with. at the same time, I recognize that marriage holds a lot of value for a lot of people, both symbolically and legally. But I think I think we can't have a binary split here between, you know, it's totally assimilationist, or we can be totally radical and abolish it altogether. I think there is somewhere in the middle where maybe one of our next human rights struggles needs to be, as Danielle said, recognizing kinship structures, recognizing different family forms. And I think something like that, something like a more progressive approach to recognizing family forms would also allow for things like, you know, relationships where the participants have different gender modalities, like the lesbian couple with one cis woman and one trans woman, who wanted to be registered as the co-mothers of their baby. So something, you know, maybe one of the things that we start to push for now, that we have marriage equality in that in certain places at least, is the recognition of alternative family structures and alternative family forms. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, just when Imani gave Imani's answer on international law, is something that I was thinking about actually earlier when I was talking about language, is that international law is in itself a language. So international law has these terms that we use, and international law has these terms that are justiciable. So you make these claims, you can claim, you know, you can bring in, I have a human right as a member of the LGBT community, or as you know, someone who is part of a SOGI minority. I have a human right to freedom from discrimination, and it's recognized under international law. And that's translatable into a domestic legal system as well. So I do quite a bit of work on India, which obviously has a very similar colonial context to what Imani was saying about Kenya. The colonial hangover of laws, and especially of the penal code that would have been left behind. And the progress that has been made in queer and trans rights in the courts in India in the past decade or so has been largely done through the language of international law, and has largely been done through invoking things like the Carta principles, like UN rulings. So I'm not sure if Cedaw was brought in, but I know the Human Rights Committee was certainly cited. The European Court of Human Rights was also cited. So it's very much that language of what is, you know, human rights are a justiciable context. Human rights are something that translates, and therefore international law can be, you know, used quite effectively in the domestic context, especially when litigating, especially. So that was quite rambling. It was basically I completely agree with Imani on the uses of international law. So yeah, I'll hand back now.
Thank you very much. That was a lot more than rambling. I think it again brings us back to the way in which queer and feminist activists use international law and the utility that international law has. We don't, like I say, there's a tendency amongst feminists, which I enjoy, not to exaggerate its potential, but to try and mine its potential and to put the best foot forward. I can't see any raised hands here from any of our panelists at the moment, so I don't think there are any further contributions here right now. I don't know if either of our speakers want to respond to that contribution there. Is a literal hand up there from Imani? Thank you. So Imani, I'm going to pass over to you. We are very close to time now, so if I can ask you just to present your final thoughts, but we're really looking forward to hearing your final thoughts today.
Yeah, so I just wanted to raise an instance that an issue that I haven't, and it's basically in regard to looking inward. So in instances where even LGBTIQ people engage in same-sex relationships or same-gender relationships, and their qualms that they experience within their relationships, then it would be impossible for them to even seek the right to inheritance in the event that their partners are deceased, or instances where we are occasioned with intimate partner violence. Then there's no justice, there's no redress to justice that is provided for LGBTIQ people because of a law that criminalizes LGBTIQ people in Kenya. I just wanted to mention that it's something that I hadn't, and thank you for giving me that opportunity. Thank you so much, Loveday.
Thank you. And Danielle, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to say at the end, or
I'm just disappointed that we can't continue the conversation more, because there's so much, to unpack, and lots of food for thought. So thanks everybody for your contributions.
Thank you so much to both of you. I guess particular thanks to Danielle for stepping in at such short notice, but thank you both for the richness of your presentations and the people, and getting us started on these discussions in such a wonderful way. My co-organisers, Meghan and Catherine, have learned that I am the least organised of the three of us, so I'm just going to pass over probably to Catherine to see if there's any kind of administrative points that need to be made. She's just picking, and but otherwise I really look forward. Thank you everyone for your contributions today, and I look forward to carrying on these discussions tomorrow. Thank you.
I see before Leah has her hand up. Leah, did you want to chime in for some pre-concluding thoughts?
I missed that. I think we will, if it's all right with Catherine, is that right?
I'm just trying to find her, sorry, in the system here. I don't seem to have her. Has she signed
Seems
up?
to be in attendees. I'm not really sure why, but I just see her hand is up digitally. Maybe Leah, did you want to type in your comment if you can't?
I've allowed her to talk.
I just wanted to thank all panelists for being so rich in their presentations, and there was a lot of freshness and thoughts for future contemplations. That's my pleasure to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Leah. That's really, really generous of you, and it's great. It's really
Marion has her hand up too, I notice.
This is it. We've obviously we are absolutely not going to silence the committee here. So, and Mary, if I can, Marion, if I could ask you to take the floor, please.
Yes, I too would like to thank the presenters for giving us so much to think about in the committee. The nuances and the just the extension and the imagination and the creativity that we really need to bring to this conversation, and the courage. I think that's, that's really, really important. And so the contributions have been profound and certainly extended my understanding of various issues. And I think it really requires an imagination and a creativity and a political will to move forward to advance the rights of the SOGI community under the Cedaw Convention. Thank you.
Thank you. I think if that's it for contributions, thank you ever so much, Meghan, for spotting those hands up. I do just want to give a nod to the other committee members who've been so generous in giving their time and joining us today. It's wonderful to have you here. But for now, I'll pass back to Catherine.
Thank you. It's I just to thank everyone again, and the only piece of housekeeping I have is just to say, please do come join us tomorrow. These discussions will continue. We have 2 wonderful sessions, and the links that you used for today will also work for tomorrow. We are recording all of the discussions. This recording will be available immediately on the Facebook page for the Transitional Justice Institute at Ulster University. And for anyone who's registered, we will convey the links to you shortly after the workshop concludes as well. So thank everyone for your time and your participation, your contributions. It's been really, I think, exceeded our expectations, and our expectations were high. So, and to encourage you all just to come back tomorrow and have a good evening or afternoon wherever you are in the world. Okay. Take care. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Danielle and Imani.